Well, it's 5 after panelists. Shall we just introduce ourselves?
Let's do it.
Okay, go ahead. You start, Derek.
You're on mute.
I am muted. You would think I would have learned by now with the environment in which that we are in. Oh goodness, I apologize. Hey, good evening, everyone. My name is Derek Brinkley. I am the Assistant Vice President of Undergraduate Admissions at Columbia College, Chicago. I've been there for about 3.5 years at this point in time. Prior to that, spent a portion of my career at Loyola University, Chicago, a portion of my career at Xavier University in Cincinnati, and then a portion of my career at a small school, Mount St. Joseph's University on the west side of Cincinnati. And I am so excited that you all are here with us today for part 2 of Dear White Bosses, to talk through some of our own tips and tricks and thoughts and feelings about how we all can become better advocates for our folks of color, especially that work with us on our team. So excited to have you all here with us this evening. How about Ralph? Go on and take it over.
All right. Thank you. I am Ralph Figueroa. I'm a little bit of the oddball. I'm on the high school side. I'm at Albuquerque Academy in New Mexico. This is my 19th year at Albuquerque Academy, but I spent 10 years in college admission before this. And I been working with this group of amazing folks to give this series of presentations, and we are going to be more interactive this time and are going to be wanting to hear more directly from you, your comments, your questions, as we all navigate and try to figure out the best approaches and new ideas for addressing these really timely and important issues. Darryl.
Hi, everybody. I'm Darryl Jones, Senior Associate Director of Admission and Coordinator for Multicultural Admission and Intercollegiate Athletic Liaison at Gettysburg College. This is literally the very beginning of my 36th year. Part of what I want you to understand is that the panelists, we've been together for a few years, and especially a lot this summer. We're going to say a lot, and none of it will be sugar-coated. In fact, some of it will be a jagged pill. And I'm going to start by telling you all a little bit about how I feel, just about how things are going to go. So, we're going to educate, we're going to have dialogue. Mostly we're here to learn and teach. So, Jess Lord, what do you have to say, my man?
It's hard to follow you, Darryl. Good evening, everyone. It's great to see you all. I'm Jess Lord. I'm the Vice President and Dean of Admission and Financial Aid at Haverford College. I've been there since 2005, and this is overall, though, 26th year working in admission. Previously, I've been at Pomona and at Brown, and I haven't been on all the panels with this group. I joined for the first Dear White Bosses session and here now, and I made a comment last session that I felt like I got called up to the big leagues. This is an illustrious panel, and I'm very fortunate to share any space with these amazing folks. And I was really honored and thrilled to have been invited to join for these conversations. And to me, I'm just trying to reflect my own lifelong commitment to learning, to my own humility and understanding how experience other than my own is essential to understand. And especially in this particular context of this framework, what it means to be a supervisor in a position of power or authority or decision-making, and the kind of opportunity we have to reshape the world and the way our day-to-day lives unfold and the way that we are all able to do our work. And so if I'm able to contribute to this conversation anyway, I'm going to do my best to do so. So, and then to pass it to our MVP, Tamara, I'll give it to you.
They're very kind. Again, my name is Tamara Siler. I'm Deputy Director of Admission and I'm only Deputy of Admission. You have to relearn your titles at some point. And then, but with a specialty in access and inclusion. I'm starting my 28th year as a member of the Rice admission team. I would be closer to Darryl if I had immediately started my admission career after I graduated from Rice, but I did a stint in corporate America instead. And so I've seen, you know, these issues from a corporate standpoint as well. And you know, I wish I could say that it's dramatically different. I mean, I think some of the same things come into play. But I think what drew me to the session, because honestly, the Dear White Bosses was the gift that I didn't know we were going to get. It's like, so I think we, because, you know, we thought the conversation might be, you know, but there were so many people who were so invested in the conversation. That's why we're doing part 2. And so, and that's edifying. You know, but I will say really what drew me to the space was the first 3 sessions, and really talking to the people of color who are doing this work. And remembering my own first days as a young admission officer, and the things that you felt like you had power over, and then the things that you didn't, you know, and things that didn't seem that traumatic at the time, but and when the decision was being made, but ended up being challenging on the road. You know, not necessarily thinking about the territory, not necessarily thinking about the safety, not necessarily thinking about the politics, not necessarily thinking, and so, but also the flip side of that is not necessarily thinking about the opportunities, not necessarily thinking about sending, you know, somebody who is a valued representative of your institution into the same spaces, and not just as you would any other person, and not just sending them to the spaces where they are represented by their skin color. And so, so I think, you know, that's really what drew me to the space, was really kind of talking through and to realize in 2020 that we're still doing it. And it's like that there's places where we're making decisions on the work that people do based on not necessarily their talents, but what we can get out of them. And it's like, and what they represent. And so, so yes, so with that, I think we're gonna move into some topics. So that's why I'm here.
Yeah, I wanted to start off by talking a little bit about how weary we've all become just trying to live in this pandemic world. Even since the last Dear White Bosses session, we've had more time working in this online world, and it's exhausting. And I have a lot of experience, a lot of ways of talking with students and families, and then I have to figure out how to translate those into an online world and make it work and make sure all the links are there and everything. And it's twice as much work as it was before, if not more. So I want to start off about talking how tired we all are, and to let you know, if it hasn't occurred to you right now, that your staff, your people you work with, are in crisis right now. Even if you haven't had a chance to connect with them, haven't had a chance to check in with them and find out how they're doing, they need help. They need time. They need flexibility. They need your support. And don't wait for them to ask. Just assume that that's the case and do what you can to support them in that way. And you, especially those of you who supervise people, you are dealing with an entirely different world. You have data that is upside down or totally useless, or you don't have it. You have institutions that are looking at futures that are very different from what they were 6 months ago. And you are exhausted too, and we know that. And you need to take care of yourself. But that exhaustion, which we recognize and we affirm, does not mean that you get to take a break from social justice work. It does not mean that you get to stop putting equity at the forefront of what you do and how you interact and what you plan and what you decide. Because for the people of color in your offices, they never get a break. This is what we live with on top of everything else that we're all dealing with in this pandemic. So I want to both recognize your weariness and how hard you're working and encourage you to take care of yourself, but also tell you that you have to keep working at this, that we have to keep putting in the effort and putting in the work. And that's what we want to talk about tonight. Brainstorm some of the ways to improve what you're doing, because we don't get to put this down, and we need you not to put this down right now. And I see Darryl nodding in agreement. What would you add?
Just that there is a lot happening. You know, this whole our political situation, the world situation, when we count week umpteenth that somebody is shot in the back, shot in the face, unarmed, etc., it can make the whole argument about equity versus equality and all those things muddy. It can make people's emotions run high. And in fact, when you think about equality versus equity, I want to share just a bit of an illustration of what I mean by that. Because when you look at equality, it is literally, why treat everybody the same regardless of their background and regardless of their race? It's not a big deal. There's a problem with that. And I hope you understand the problem with that is, not everybody starts with the same footing. Not everybody starts with the same advantage. Not everybody starts with the same height, same advantages, same education. But here's a problem when you talk about equality and privilege. For some, Franklin Leonard, my favorite quote, when you're accustomed to privilege, equality feels like oppression. Why are you giving that person an advantage over me? Why use affirmative action because that's not important? Why give that person certain responsibilities over me? As bosses, you have the job to lift everyone. Lift everyone. But you gotta lift people in ways that they need, which means you have to be nimble enough to see it and know it. And then you have to say to yourself, what's my end game? I've got to get people to a certain level to help this team. What do certain people need, and what might it be that some people need more of to get us to where we need to be? So equality and equity, that's where I lean all the time, Ralph. People, well, I'm going to put it the way I would put it. People always get that twisted, and it's tiring for me to have people get it twisted week after week, year after year. Derek Brinkley, what you got to say?
You know what, Darryl? So here's what I'm going to say. I think one of the things that's so important for folks to recognize and understand about this moment in time that we're in right now, yes, we all saw what happened and know what happened to George Floyd, right? But I think it's also important to really understand and recognize that none of this is new. This is not new. Technology is newer. The ability to be able to videotape what's going on is newer. There's all of these other things that are now bringing what's been happening for decades and centuries really to the forefront, right? And so, you know, for those of you that are sitting there wondering why, you know, maybe your staff of color are maybe sitting more in the back and they're a little bit quieter, or you're wondering why aren't they really engaging in, you know, this topic that we're talking about in this meeting, you really have to understand that even prior to this moment that we're in right now, even prior to COVID, we've all been exhausted. You know, and so it's important to know that this is not a new thing. And this is not going to be a quick fix either, right? This is not something where, you know, you all as white bosses, as example, are going to, you know, be able to quickly turn around, you know, your office and make sure that all of your staff of color feel supported, if you even have staff of color, because I know some of your offices probably don't, right? It's going to take time for this change and for this movement to continue to happen. But I think it's just important to understand, because some people I've noticed are opening their eyes to what's going on for the very first time. And it's great. Like, kudos. We're glad that you are finally here understanding and getting a sense of really what's going on in the world. But know that for your folks of color who are on staff, this is nothing new. It's so the tiredness, the exhaustion, what it is that we feel, it can take a toll on people. It can really take a toll on people. And if you're not in tune with your team, if you're not in tune with your staff, if you're not worried about their actual well-being as a human being, what are you doing? Right? What are you doing? Like, it's so important for us, I think, as bosses to, again, lift everyone up in the ways, like Darryl said, in the ways that folks need to be lifted in order for them to succeed in their roles and succeed in life, right? I think that folks are so used to kind of this separation between how I show up at work and how I show up in my personal life and whatnot. And I think that you have to understand that folks of color, we can't separate what we do at work from who we intrinsically are as human beings. We can't do that. It's just, at least I can't do it. I don't know about anyone else on this call, but I can't do it. And so it's just important for you to just realize and understand that it takes time, and people are really, really, really tired, and you've got to be sensitive to that. I understand all of you have goals that you need to achieve for your institutions. You have, net tuition revenue goals, and all of these kind of things that you're trying to achieve. I get it. I totally understand that. And at the same time, if you develop your people, and if you treat your people as the #1 priority in what it is that you do as a team leader, your people typically are going to step up to the plate. I can speak to having a very fantastic team right now who are mission driven, who want to do the right work. And I think some of that has to do with the leadership in our office. And that's not just me. That's the other associate directors that are on my team. My good friend Holly is on this call, who's she's our associate provost. She's one of the people that also helps lift people up. You gotta put your team first. You have to develop your staff. You've gotta make sure that they have what they need, because they're not gonna do the best work if you aren't taking care of your people and making sure that they have all the tools, resources that they need in order to be successful. Tamara, what you got to say?
Well, I was sitting here and I was thinking about just creating space. I think what I'm hearing from people is that they feel like things have gone silent. I mean, and so that, once we started really ramping up this year, like there's no more spaces for conversation. Before we start a staff meeting, a team meeting ever, the first thing I said, how's everybody doing? It's and I'm not saying that, but in some cases, don't push people also to share, take the signals. If somebody's really being, in particular, really withdrawn, maybe create that private space for them to interact with you and really, make sure that, but I think people don't do it because they're afraid to do it wrong. You're going to get something wrong. That's not, getting it right or wrong is not the issue here. I think a genuine, sincere effort is all that people are looking for. They're looking for sincerity. They're looking for, spaces. And I think, I know that, and what I don't want to see do is create spaces where all of a sudden people of color find themselves in a position where they have to do work. So, I think, when you create spaces where all of a sudden everybody's sharing their feelings, and now all of a sudden everybody's looking at the person of color to say, well, what do you think about everybody's feelings? It's I think so. There is, there's a kind of space that you need to create, but also don't forget that a lot of us are bringing a lot to the table as well. When we were in college, we had, imposter syndrome type of things. We constantly were questioning whether we were good enough. And that doesn't stop when you get to be an employee. And so when you're not creating spaces for people to truly develop, to truly grow, to grow beyond their role, I would not be here if my only role in the office was access and inclusion. I would not be here 28 years later, because I decided a long time ago that that was not going to be my job my job is to create spaces for other people to learn about what access and inclusion is, to make sure that I'm setting the tone, to make sure I'm setting a path, to make sure I'm providing the learning, to make sure I'm providing. That is what access and inclusion should be. But there should never be a point where that person is the only person that can interact with people, because that creates its own level of trauma, that creates its own level of exhaustion. And then you basically have made that person the owner of something that will never work unless it's institution-wide. And so now you've put them in a position where they can't be successful. because they can never, that person cannot change an entire institution. So I think we just really need to think about, the spaces, not only the safe spaces to have feelings, to have literal feelings, but the spaces to make sure that we're not isolating people to do certain types of work, and that is not a sustainable model. So Jess, I'll pass it on to you.
Thanks, Tamara. I mean, I want to actually just join in on a comment you made just now in terms of one of the first comments you made in terms of making mistakes. I've actually had a lot of conversations outside of our profession, just with adult friends who are feeling a certain, white friends who are feeling a paralysis about making mistakes. And the paralysis is a mistake. That's the mistake, right? The silence, the paralysis, the unwillingness to participate in this, that's actually the biggest mistake of all. And it's really hard. And it's of course, it's scary. And being really blunt, white people, we're really afraid to talk about race. It's not something we have to do. It's not something we're required to do. It's not something we typically have practice doing. But you have to do it. And I'm also thinking about a comment you made, Derek, just now. I just, from me, my own opinion and perspective on management in general, and I think it's exceptionally important in this context, is why wouldn't you manage to empower people to be themselves, their authentic selves in your space? Why wouldn't that be your management style and approach? And I'll repeat a phrase I used at the last session, is the sort of the crime of the facades of conformity, right? You want a space where people are putting on these good faces and and behave. It's sort of like they're only allowed to be the corporate entity, and that's really your responsibility, if you're in a position of any kind of authority or supervision, whatnot, to shift culture away from that, and actually then just really taking everybody's value as they are. The other thing I want to share, just as we were talking about how traumatic things are for everybody in different ways. And we're really feeling that in our office on a number of different levels, and including, I mean, we talked about the ramp up, and the ramp up, there's no question, all of us in our institutions, from the secondary side to the higher ed side, COVID has been all consuming in how we are going to proceed. But what's going on, our president, for example, at Haverford is calling it the dual pandemics, and the pandemic of racism is really no less important. But it's harder to hold on to because COVID is right there in front of us, right? And racism isn't preventing us from opening, right? But COVID is, and so it's easy to get sucked into this and lose steam. And so I've actually been spending a lot of energy thinking about habits of mind, right? And I'm talking a lot, but I'll just make this comment in terms of, the idea of habits of mind. There's something that's been going around the last few days, at least I've seen it a lot on Facebook and other places last few days, an analogy, which is a really effective analogy to me for conveying to people who are skeptical of the existence of racism and systemic racism. It's the analogy of a cake and the presence of eggs in a cake, right? And that most of us, we may not notice eggs in a cake, but if you're allergic to eggs, you sure as hell notice the eggs in the cake, right? And it's right there for you every time that cake is in front of you, and anytime you might take a bite of that cake, that egg is in that cake. And a lot of people like that, and there's a lot I like about that. Most analogies don't bear really close inspection and being picked apart. Where that analogy stops being effective for me is, I'm not allergic to eggs, and I will never taste egg when I eat a cake. But if I'm being conscious about racism, I will see it everywhere. I will see it all the time. And this is about habits of mind. And so I can name some work that we're doing. For example, we're doing every 2 weeks, and as an office, we have dedicated time as a full staff for anti-racism conversations, to be examining the work that we do, the history and contemporary work of admission, and the ways that it is racist, and what it would take for us to be anti-racist. And that's partly to maintain this as a habit of mind, that every member of staff needs to be thinking about this and conscious of this in all the work we do as we go along. And we certainly can't make change to everything we do every 2 weeks, right? But we are coming to deeper understandings of actually the structures that we are part of that are in fact racist, biased in other ways too, in many other ways too, that we can begin this journey of breaking that apart.
There's one more thing I want to add, and then, you know, I didn't talk to my fellow panelists about this, so, but there's I mean, I think language matters. I think there's this constant sort of talk that we're a family and we, you know, and we need to get along and that type of thing. When that kind of language is being used, most often it's going to require extra work of the people of color to make that family happen. And they're the ones that are constantly put into the position of forgiving, you know, a conversation, or, you know, and I'm not saying you shouldn't strive to be a harmonious workplace, but family has, you know, I mean, I'm not sure we want to be a family. Family has its dysfunctions. So, but I also think that, you know, it seems you should not make certain people of color overlook their trauma in search of harmony. And it's like, that's just, and that's not, you know, that is unfortunately what happens a lot, you know, like all of a sudden the pressure is on that person who's constantly experiencing microaggressions. And all of a sudden, you know, if you're saying harmony and family and everything like that, they are now saying, okay, I guess I got to put that away and not deal with it, because the requirement of my office is that I be harmonious with people who literally are creating a situation for me every day that I go home and I'm extra exhausted because yet again, somebody has put me in a space of trauma. So I just wanted to bring that up, because I think we do tend to say this family thing a lot, and I'm not sure everybody feels like they're part of the family.
Yeah, that is a topic that we wanted to drill down a little into, just the idea of office culture and addressing the issues, the problems, and also the opportunities that come up in looking at your own office culture and looking at what you have done, what you have set up. Tamara, as always, hits it right on the head with the idea that we are not necessarily looking to set up a family. We're looking to set up an office that has an operation and goals and things it must achieve. And there's teamwork that we must do together. And how are you going to address the needs of your team members when they might be something that's different from you, that they might be something that you can't see, like the eggs in that cake that are going to cause an allergic reaction. How do you see what you can't see? You can only do that by stopping and engaging and asking and finding out, what are we doing wrong? What do we need to be doing better? Where can we be more supportive? And where can we just like back off and not try to make folks family who aren't there to be your family? I mean, it's hard because there are so many different places on the spectrum where you can go. But let's talk more about specifically the office culture. How do you both be supportive and not be intrusive and just try to be aware and focused of things that you're not used to seeing? Darryl wants to add to this, I could see.
But first, I want to hear from Derek, because he's about to drop something on y'all that I love hearing. Hit it, D.
So, when you think about culture, when you think about professionalism, let's talk about that word professionalism, right? That term professionalism, what's that really code for? Like white culture, right? It is what is acceptable in a particular area, a particular workplace, that is going to make the majority in that workplace feel accepted and feel comfortable. That's what professionalism is all about. And so I really, as I guess, lead my office, I really encourage folks to think differently about what it means to be professional, right? And the example that I love to bring up, and colleagues will laugh at me because I've said this a couple of times, but one of the things that you will notice about me when I show up in a space in terms of how I look is that sometimes in my workplace, I might be wearing jeans, sometimes I'm wearing capris, sometimes I've got a little short sleeve shirt with my tattoo showing. Like, I just kind of show up in the space at my office in the way that I am. And that's just what I do. And, you know, there's so many offices that focus so much on dress code and you know, what you should wear this and you shouldn't wear that. And you need to show up on time for this. And, you know, if you are, you know, 10 minutes late during the, you know, the start of the workday, you know, we're going to write you out. I just don't prescribe to this mess. I just really don't. I am very much the kind of person where my team shows up how they want. I always tell folks, hey, look, we've got people that are coming to our place of employment, so you want to look presentable in some way, I guess. But we very much at Columbia talk about a dress mission statement. We don't do a dress code. It's more of a mission statement. It's how do we want people to feel when they walk into our home, when they walk into our office, when they walk into our place of employment. And we really spend time focusing on that and not focusing on whether someone's wearing, you know, a particular item of clothing that they shouldn't be, or if, you know, your skirt's too short, or whatever the case is. Like, these things to me just don't matter. Same as if, you know, if people are showing up 10 to 15 minutes late for work, 20 minutes late for work, okay. Maybe something happened when they were on the train that morning. What is it doing to you at the end of the day if these people, if the folks that are reporting to you aren't meeting those expectations, right? And I think it's important for us to just try our best as leaders to get out of that mindset, because I just think that mindset, in my opinion, can be so limiting to really lifting up your staff and making sure that they are performing at their full potential. If my staff was so worried about being on campus right at 9 o'clock in order to, you know, get the office open and started, you know, I don't want that extra stress for them. There's no need for that extra stress. If people are there, we've got the office open, we're good. If you have an appointment or, you know, you're doing a tour intro or something, sure, you probably want to make sure that you're there. And if you're not, someone's going to cover you and we're going to take care of it. But there just can be, in my opinion, so many of these rules and regulations and things that offices put in place for purposes that I don't always understand. And so I think it's just so important to really think differently about how you are managing your staff, how you are making sure that folks, you know, are adhering to what it is that culture of that place needs to be in a way, but really getting away from kind of this very strict, boxed definition of professionalism and what that looks like and how that should be represented. Because, you know, I have people with tattoos all over their body and different color hair that works for me and all these kind of things, and it doesn't matter. It doesn't prevent them from doing the hard work and the good work that they need to do. And sometimes people get so focused on those minute kind of things and those little items that it really will bog you down and it will bog your staff down. And when they know that you're watching them for all of the little things that they did or they said, or that, you know, how they dressed or whatever, they know when you're watching them, right? And again, no one's going to do the best work when they feel like people are actually really watching it. So we've got a comment here. Is it wrong to have a mindset that dress should be professional, that maybe jeans at your institution are too casual, or does it then become a sign of one's own implicit bias? That's a really, really great question, Kathleen. I appreciate you asking that. Here's my take, right? My take is that some of this certainly does depend on the institution that you're at, right? I think that there is something about the institutional culture, right? And if you're not familiar with Columbia College Chicago, we are a college for creatives, right? So our kids, a third of our kids are LGBTQ. 54% of our freshman class this year are students of color. Like, we're just this kind of institution that, as a part of our culture at the institution, it is much more okay to do that. But, you know, even if, you know, maybe jeans is too casual for your particular institution, what are those ways that people can still show up as themselves? And I think that's what I really want you to think about. How can people show up as themselves in that institution, in that culture, and still fit, you know, in a way, what that culture really calls for? So I do think that there's ways to reconcile some of that. You know, again, for me, like when I'm going to like our admitted student days, so a lot of what I'll wear is like a cute pair of and I'm queer, so just, give me a moment. Like a cute pair of like really these navy khaki, or not navy khaki, but these navy capris that I wear. I still put on a suit jacket. I still might have on a tie. I might have some bolder colors. Like I show up for my admitted student days, still wearing things that I think are professional, but they still have their own little twist and things that kind of go along with it. So it's about getting out of just this limited mindset of what it means to be a professional in our industry. I am a person in my team who's on here will know, like I cuss a lot, and that's okay, especially again at my culture, at the institution that I'm at. We can do a little bit more of that. So it's just getting out of this very traditional, strict mindset, and really thinking differently, especially I think as staffs are probably getting younger and younger, right? I can say this as a 34-year-old millennial leader in my office. I don't prescribe to a lot of these, more kind of professional kind of things as well. So Ralph, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I'm going to jump in really quickly because I know Darryl has more to add, but I want to jump in really quickly about the dress code idea, about the professionalism. I want to push here too. I'm a very formal guy. I was raised by lawyers. I come from a family of lawyers. I always wore a tie at work at the academy. And then a few years ago, we decided to change, and they said we could get rid of the ties. And everybody looked at me because they figured I would be the one to protest. And I said, these are stupid pieces of cloth. Why am I putting this damn thing around my neck every day? And it was just, for me, I realized that had nothing to do with my professionalism. It had nothing to do with how I do my job and the image I present to the public and to parents when they come in. But it took me a while to shift there, to get there. So I want to push. I understand your idea that jeans don't fit the workplace. I understand where that comes from, and I see you for that. But you need to push on that on yourself, because you want to bring people as themselves, Derek. Let them be who they are, and that's going to be much more powerful. So
yeah, and I think about it before I turn it over to Darryl. I do think about, there are some folks in my office that might wear like a pair of sneakers with a really nice pair of like dress slacks, and like for me, it's much more it's about the whole picture. When folks really get into no jeans, no this, no that, that's where for me it gets limiting. Because I think that there are very fashionable ways to wear jeans and other items that might not be traditional in the workplace, right? And so it's going to take time, right? It's going to take time to push out of that. And I think that in my opinion, it needs to be a conversation that occurs with your entire team and your entire staff, right? We started a conversation about 3 years ago when I started at Columbia about what that looked like for us. And the way that I started with it was a dress code. Like we started talking about it in the way of a dress code, and the way that our conversation morphed over the day that we kind of talked about at our retreat, it very much turned more into this dress mission statement. And I just think what Sarah just said is, I think, so incredibly important, the degendering of the dress code, and not, that is just so incredibly important. With our trans students, our gender non-conforming students, our non-binary students, like it is important for them to also see visibility and see someone that looks like them, or that approaches life and dresses in a way and comes across in a way like them. And so those things, that degendering, I think is just a really great point, Sarah. Thank you for saying that out loud. Because, we have probably 3 or 4 folks on our staff that are gender non-binary at Columbia. And again, they will show up in any which way that they kind of want to. And for us, again, with our culture, it's okay. Darryl, go on.
So I have a task for you all, and it's not that we're judging, we just want to observe. Whether you are a boss or a mentor or a manager, I want you to put your thoughts into the chat, even though it's going to scroll at 1,000,000 miles an hour. This is going to be about office culture. What does it mean to have diversity in your office culture versus inclusion in your office culture? So I'm going to talk about a few things, but I want to see what you say about what it means, again, to have diversity in your office culture, whatever that diversity could mean, because there are several different types, versus you as a manager, mentor, boss, working to include that diversity. I just tipped my hat, but let's have at it, folks. Man, they are lighting that chat on fire, by the way. So all I'm going to say, this is going to be my last screen share, unless it's not. You all know how I am. Look, when we know better, we just do better. Like what? It's not that hard. So here's what I know. Some bosses are so insecure that all they want to do is create a bunch of new thems. Like, I couldn't wear that kind of dress, that kind of shirt, so nobody should. I can't do that kind of speech, so nobody should. I didn't come up with that idea, so no one should. I don't do, as a white boss, anything with inclusion and diversity with regard to ethnicity. So I'm not going to have my non-BIPOC people talk to those students. In fact, whenever one comes into the office, I'm going to just get one of my brown people to talk to them because they'll do better. Folks, here's what I know. If someone walks in the door and wants psychology, are you going to describe your psychology program differently just because the person has a different skin color from you? I don't know. Are you going to articulate the value of your institution differently because someone appears to have a different ethnicity from me or you? I don't know. Are you able to talk about what your institution is doing with regard to racial and social justice? Justice, not a conversation, not a book club, but justice. Is that part of your training, or are you too uncomfortable? So as a boss, as a mentor, as someone who manages, you first have to be the most comfortable with being uncomfortable so that you can stretch your staff. Second, you have to be okay with difference so that you can embrace difference and understand what it means to have a different perspective. And then, as has been placed in the chat several times, you hired it, you need to trust it, or you are breaking that person down. So building an office culture, training an office culture, elevating an office culture, it's about one simple thing, folks. You got to lean into what makes you uncomfortable and stretch yourself, or all you're doing is basically perpetuating some kind of old school, well, this is how it's been done for decades and decades, so I'm just going to follow that instead of thinking on my own and doing what needs to be done to advance this team. So training on diversity is everyone's job. And as my co-panelists have heard, if you are not having everyone equally adept at speaking with people of color or people who are different from them by gender expression, you are creating an office of apartheid recruitment. If it isn't everybody's job to talk to everybody of every background when they're in your face, you're creating an apartheid system. You are Jim Crow recruiting. And yes, I just said that. So y'all better think, and I haven't checked the chat, but I'm going to scroll back through it, that inclusion doesn't mean you have it. Inclusion means you embrace and trust and elevate and amplify voices that are different from yours. Either that, or you just don't know how to hire people the right way. Sermon over. Jess Lord, tell them how you all did it, because I hold up your staff as one that's done it right.
That's nice of you to say, Darryl. Thank you. And you know, I know some of you were with us at the first session, and so I'm repeating this for the benefit of those who may not have been in that session. But just the framework here for me is I'm always centering our mission as an office. Of course, our job, that's what we do in admission, is to build a student community. And we do so in ways that help the institution to live its mission and realize its mission. And we try to do this, our work in ways that reflect the values of the institution. And so when I talk to the staff about, well, what is our mission? And I really describe three pieces, and I'm describing, obviously, as an academic institution, we're interested in supporting the academic program at Haverford and bringing students who will thrive and succeed in the academic program. Then we talk about access and making sure the opportunity of a Haverford education is available for consideration. For our goal would be for every student to have the opportunity to consider this as a possibility for themselves and make a good decision for themselves of whether or not this is an opportunity they want to try to take advantage of. And then the other piece that I emphasize is the value we place on diversity and inclusion in the process of building a community, and the inherent value of diversity to us as a community and as an educational community. And so the mission is centered around those three pieces. And so you better believe that means that's everybody's responsibility equally. That's at the center of our work. And so every single person, just like every person reads files, every person reads interviews students, every person travels, right? With these are all shared activities, right? And that's always easy to understand. Why wouldn't support of our central mission be the responsibility area of every single member of the staff? Sure, there are some people who have responsibility for organizing programs, taking leadership roles, doing strategic planning, et cetera, but the responsibility is for everybody. And that's not just saying, yes, I care about this, and this is, to Darryl's point, very clearly, our responsibility in management roles as people who do training and mentorship and professional development, that needs to be for the whole staff, and building vocabulary, building comfort, building that. There are other parallels to this in the work we do. It's sort of I'll just be blunt, like I don't understand how there are still deans of admission who have all the private schools in Manhattan as their territory, right? It's the same sort of optics and same sort of statement of what is most important to the institution, and what is most important to you and what you're modeling when you're in a leadership role, and it's the wrong message unless you're making actually a pretty clear statement of what the mission and values of your institution are. And a really great question came up in the last session when I was talking about this then was, what if you don't feel like your institution supports you in that definition of mission? And I'm definitely very lucky that I'm at a place where that's not questioned. When I say that, when I describe our mission in those ways, everybody agrees, faculty, president, board, and so on. And I know that not everybody has that same consensus as an institution of what our priorities. But then again, that's just the leadership role that you need to assert when you are in a leadership position, is to make that statement. And I think we actually have a lot of power in admission to make a statement about how values and mission are realized as an institution.
And to build off of something Jess said in terms of like that idea of everybody taking on this responsibility, that starts when you hire. It starts when you, like, if you don't set the expectations early on, when you're in the hiring process, are there things, there better be uniformity. You should be asking the same things of the person that you see in this A&I role as, somebody, that will not necessarily be leading the A&I efforts. But if you don't mention it to them that that's an expectation when they, and see how comfortable they are in that role, then it's much like we wouldn't build a class that way. We think about the culture of our class. We think about the culture we're trying to create. We're thinking about our conversations, the spaces that we're trying to create. We're trying not to create spaces of trauma for our students of color and bring in people who respect diversity, who respect the opinions of others. We're thinking about all that when we shape a class. We need to be thinking about that just as heavily when we're shaping a staff. It's like, and that, whether that, whether that's, you know, you basically are like, even if you take them through a reading exercise, it should be reflected in that. You know, if you, you know, if like that, if you've not asked them that question as part of the interview process, then you set them up for some failure. And then don't be afraid to ask for outside help. I think sometimes, you know, there are conversations that you can try to facilitate in the office, but there are some conversations that cannot be facilitated by people who need to work with each other. It's just not going to happen, because there's always going to be a power dynamic. And it's like, and there's always going to be a lack of like somebody, and they'll be like, well, so-and-so must not really care because they didn't engage. There was too much skin in the game for that person. They couldn't say what they really wanted to say. They really could. I mean, it's like, and especially if the person that like manages them is right, is the person leading the conversation. You know, if you're trying to have decisions, like some of these conversations around bias, that may just need somebody from outside of your office who can call people on the carpet, no matter what their position in the office, and say, what you just said is not, you know, I mean, it may not have come from a place of meanness. It may not have come a place from, you know, the intentionality, but what you just said, I can imagine that if you said that in a group, you've just shut down conversation. And, you know, and I can tell you, a conversation about white fragility can turn into white fragility really quickly. So unless you have somebody who's masterful at managing those feelings, because nobody likes to be told that they have to change, that something's like, not necessarily even that something's wrong. You have to change something, because we all, and that's just uniform, but when you live in a world where your culture is the standard and mine is the elective, then then there's just spaces where you can't see all the places where it just you've slipped into a level of comfort. And so it needs somebody who is trained, and maybe, you know, maybe a multicultural team of people to come in, because they can work with you, people who have confronted their own bias, because you cannot do this work without confronting your own bias. I have biases. I mean, like all of us do. And it's like, you know, and so we all have to confront them, but you know, it's almost like we know we do, because we know what the effect is of us on people who exercise their bias on us. So so don't be afraid to ask for that outside help, because that is going to be key sometimes to making really strong breakthroughs.
Okay, I want to jump in here. I mean, every time we start to come to the verge of another topic, Tamara just jumps in there before we even get there. So we wanted to talk a little bit about training, and the idea of, do you need to go for outside people to come in to help your institution? But I want to circle back and call out Amy Lee, who talks about blowing up the regular routine when she became a boss. So this is one of the reasons why we did this way. Amy, I want you to talk a little bit about that, how you sort of changed up the routine and how you did training to do things in a different way. So I want you to unmute yourself. And talk to us.
I'm in my 22nd year of admissions. I started when I was 5.
Yeah,
of course. I could possibly be old enough, but this has been my lifelong adult career. And I knew early on, I gave that example of, for, you know, new college reps, on the road all day, totally getting burnt out, college fair at night, getting home at 11 p.m., expected to be back in the office at 8 a.m. Like Derek said, dressed professionally. I think I was told that I had to wear a suit. I had to go out and buy suits, never mind just looking business casual. I had to buy suits in my first job. And I had to wear, I believe they even said stockings or nylons. And I knew if I ever got in a position to hire people or to set the culture of an office, that I would do how I wanted to be treated. So I'm the one that wrote something like that. Your sick cat is as important as my sick child. There are people that got mad at that in my office, like, oh, her cat's sick and she has to go to the vet, so she's late. It's like, how is that different? That's their life. That's what's important to whoever it is in our office. And I'm late almost every single day because I got to drop my kids off at school before I get to work, and I have a long commute. And so I'm not going to sit there like this either. Get your work done, have fun while doing it. And I don't care, during COVID, you want to get up at noon and work till 8 p.m.? Is the work done? Did the stuff go out? Why did you need to be online at 8? So I think it's easier to do than you think it might be. If you work at a school that has a culture of, you got to be back in the office the next day. If you're working at a college fair at night, I say that is your day, right? Go in at 12, work for a couple hours, go to your college fair. That's your 8 or 9 hours. We're not getting paid overtime in admissions to be working 80 hours a week. So I just think that if you are in a position that you can make some of these changes for your staff, they're appreciative, they stay. I have very low turnover also. And I mean, I've learned a lot. I came to the first session though, and I don't want to act like I know everything either, because I had to really look in the mirror after and think about the people that work for me that are people of color that I've sent on the road without even thinking about where they're going. Now listen, I'm in Maine. Anywhere they're going is, you know,
Full of white people.
in Maine. But how does a person of color feel driving in East Maine? You know, and if they got pulled over, and are they feeling safe? And are they feeling safe seeing a Trump sign on every lawn where I'm sending them? I did not even think of that, because we're a community college in Maine. We just kind of recruit locally. Didn't even think of it. And after this first session, I went right to my staff of color and said, I am so sorry. Let's talk about this. And most of them were like, what? Yeah, it's fine. We're in Maine. But the fact that I never thought of that was that real looking in the mirror at my own privilege of just assigning territories and not even thinking about how people felt about it. And so we can all, like that Maya Angelou quote, we can all always do better when we know better. But I think those small changes about culture, about the way you dress, about, you know, we wear SMCC sweatshirt to college fairs now, you know, I mean, wear what you want, be who you are. So I just think if you are in a position that you can make those small changes, it's amazing that people on my staff, what they say is they feel so appreciative if they have children, and I'm saying work after they're done with their online school, you know, whatever it might be, like just treat them how you would want to be treated yourself if you were going through something.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Amy, for being a good sport and stepping in and giving us a great perspective. Colleagues, what else do you want to talk about with training? What else can we talk about?
And this will not be my last, sorry. But guess what Amy did? Amy saw something and she said, let's just blow up the system. Let's not go along to get along. Let's just dismantle what doesn't make sense. Much love for you, Amy. Sorry about that, but go ahead, folks.
Well, I kind of like this query from Jonathan. I mean, I also saw one about if a student asks to speak with a person of color in your office and you don't have one, you don't want to make up a story if you don't have a, like, I mean, it's like, you know, I mean, but I think there's a level of honesty, just transparency in it, and that kind of like this year, transparency is the word. And it's like, you know, you don't want them to get there and be looking for something they can't find. So, you know, I mean, I had to come to that realization. Nobody feels like my institution is not the place for someone, and you know, at some point, but you have to give a student all the honest information so that they can decide if they want to be a pioneer here. It's like if they want to be the person who's going to be, you know, to step out. And I think if you're honest with them, but say, you know, I'm more than happy to answer your questions, and you show them earnestness, you show them honesty, you show them sensitivity, you show, I'm sorry, so all of a sudden if you show that you value them, because I think in some ways that students have somehow gotten the message that there has to be a you know, Black, Indigenous person of color there to get that feeling. It's like that's the only person that's going to understand my struggle. But who knows? You might find a way to connect with them on another level. Maybe you all went to the same type of school. Maybe you all both came from a first generation background and they're just assuming that you didn't. And it's like, I mean, maybe you both like the same literature. I mean, I've bonded with kids that have backgrounds so different from me over something like a TV show or or something that all of a sudden we realize we liked the same thing. But honesty and transparency have to take precedent, especially when you're dealing with, students who might be underrepresented at your school. You can't create spaces. Now, you can also, for example, if you have partners in other offices that do have people of color that would actually be part of their student life, like if you're going to go to, like the support system, you could possibly connect them with them and say, we don't have anyone in our office, but I do work with this office, and they at least they would see that somebody is going to be there if they do want to interact with somebody who looks like them. But I think don't try to make a story different than it is. And then Jonathan wrote like middle managers who are like, and Jonathan and I know each other. So Jonathan, you need to just put people together and say, you are like, I think people get caught in their old culture. And sometimes you just have to have that come to Jesus meeting and pull everybody into the room and say, I'm not sure how it used to work here, but this is not my culture. And you will not, do things and put me in a position where people think this is what I want. I'm trying to create an inclusive culture and trying to figure out, okay, what message are you getting that you feel like you're creating all of this internal barriers that are not ones that I want. And it's like, they're not, that no one ever said to you that you should be doing. It's like maybe they need some help in learning how to manage. Because I think a lot of times we give people management positions just because they've been there a long time, but they don't know how to manage people. So you may need to actually give them some help in how to manage people, and not be coming at people with all of this rigmarole that's not necessary for the work to happen, especially not in this environment and not with all the stress that's going on. I heard that somebody said one of my staff members came to the meeting in a headscarf. It was a culturally relevant scarf. So if you see it as a headscarf, that's your problem. Like, she came, in my opinion, she came, respectfully to a meeting and she hadn't had her hair done. Well, look, it's COVID time. People not going to get their hair done the way this one going to. Come on, if this is not the year for grace, when is the year for grace?
That right there, seriously, if it's not the year for grace, when is it? Because this is the year. Darryl's showing the, for Dan Pohl, I see you there, Dan. There is the justice.
It's a solution to the other cartoon.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and one of the comments I also want to address, Holly, just in terms of, when there are very few folks of color or Black staff members on the staff, and that one person is exhausted. I think one of the things that people sometimes do fail to realize how much additional emotional labor that your staff of color do in a lot of ways take on, that you might not realize. You may not realize the connections that they built with Black students during the time that they were recruiting those Black students and are then continuing to support those Black students as they go through the process. There's so much that, there's so many students that I can point to that was extra labor that I was doing on my end because I didn't want my Black students or my students of color to go through some of the same things that I went through, right? So there is that additional labor. And to your point, Holly, that is absolutely exhausting, right? And so, I think when things happen, particularly things that happen in the news, right? I think about when George Floyd, when that whole situation happened, that next day, you better believe that I emailed my Black and brown employees and made sure that they were okay and allowed them to take a day off that week. They took another day off, I think that Friday. There was some additional kind of time that we've kind of allowed. And those are the kind of things that you got to think about. You have to be paying attention to what's going on in the world, what's happening, and being in tune as best as you can with your employees of color to make sure that you are being proactive when it comes to it. You know, there's so many situations I've heard of staffs, even just this past May when all of those things were going down, that said not a word out there to anyone. Didn't say anything. There was no word, there was no email, there was no call, there was no nothing, right? And so these little things that you can do to pay attention to what the hell's going on in the world and reach out to your Black and brown staff, those are little things that you can do in order to at least make them feel like you're paying attention to what's actually going on, right? So I do think that, again, there is a lot of that labor that Black and brown staff can take on, and sometimes it might be giving them a few extra days off, or it might be, again, making sure that your entire team, and this kind of gets to training, can everyone on your team, again, talk to everyone who walks in that office, regardless of what that person or that student's background is. And that's what, it kind of boils down to. When you kind of think about training as well, I've talked about this before in terms of training. So my staff, we have a 3-week onboarding process that we do at Columbia, and there's different sessions that are kind of a part of what we do in order to make sure that folks are getting up and running and that they feel comfortable and they can be successful. So, a typical training program, free to share some of that information with folks is needed. But I think one of the things that I actually want to talk about related to training, but slightly different is, again, what have, and this is actually a question I'm really curious in the group chat. I'm gonna pull a Darryl and ask a question. You all answer it for me in the group chat, but I'm really curious, what have you done as a staff in order to address your white supremacy in your office, in order to address the racism that occurs? Again, many of you may have had a statement that went out from your college president or, your VP or whatever that kind of said, Black Lives Matter. Cool. What are you actually doing? So I do want folks to take a moment, and I would love to see in the chat what you are doing right now here on September 17th, several months after George Floyd. What are you doing right now to actually address it?
So Derek, you mean they didn't stop mattering in May or whenever it was?
Right? But seriously, I'm very, very curious. So for us at Columbia, as an example, we have a diversity, equity, and inclusion working group within the enrollment management area that they are meeting on just started maybe last week, the week before, we really formally kind of got this crew together. But they're going to be working over the course of the next month or so on different things that we can take initiative on in our office in order to address racism. And this is a conversation I'm actually not in. I'm not leading the conversation. I'm not in the conversation. My staff is having that conversation. They are coming up with the recommendations with what it is that we should be doing. And they're going to present it to me, and we're going to figure out ways to make it work, right? We had a gentleman named Lawrence Alexander who came into our staff retreat in August and did anti-bias training with the staff. We're doing another round of anti-bias training specifically as it comes to app review here in October. One of my colleagues, TC Liggins, who I think TC actually might even be here on the call, but TC put together a series of conversations called Let's Talk. And these conversations are geared towards different affinity groups. So we have a Black group, and there's a decent group of us on campus in our office that we will meet and talk about what's going on with us, how we are feeling, what's going on there. We've got a group of non-Black folks of color that are meeting to talk about things. And then we've got a white identified group that are meeting to talk about what's going on. And those are 3 examples of things that we have done since May in order to continue to have these conversations. It's not enough to just say the Black Lives Matter. You got to show us that it actually matters, and you have to continue to have those kind of conversations. And so for me, it's really important for folks to put that in the back of your head. If you haven't addressed that, if you haven't done it, even if your staff is entirely white, you're missing the boat. You really are missing the boat on what's going on. So I'm gonna shut up and read through some of these comments to see what some people are doing.
I wanted to add in here because I noticed, Amy Lee, you're coming up again. You mentioned the 21-day racial equity habit building challenge. We're doing that at Haverford also. And this is a really good thing. And I'll maybe in a minute put a link to it so others who may not know about it can see it, because this is very much also in that sort of habits of mind category, right? We all know you can have your mind blown. You can really grow from a 2-hour session, but that's not really how you change your habits of mind. You don't change long-standing practices and ways of looking at things from doing a 2-hour anti-bias training, right? You do it from changing your way of engaging with the world and thinking about yourself within a larger context in a larger world, and that's a habit of mind. And so 21 days isn't a lifetime either, but that's the purpose of it, is to engage on an ongoing basis. And yeah, Derek, we're bringing in Lawrence Alexander also, and he's doing for us. And what's really exciting about this, he's doing reader training for us. So really diving into our whole system, our rubric, our language, how we talk about kids, and engaging with us as a whole staff. We actually can't wait to do that.
And he's amazing,
yeah.
Just absolutely amazing. So we start our reader stuff next week with him. So I was super excited about it.
Here, I'm just putting the link to the 21-day challenge into the chat too, for anyone wants to check it out. And I think that just thinking about this, whether it's training or mentorship, and even to your question, Jonathan, folks who are maybe at intermediate levels of in supervisor roles and so on, just as a white person, I'm so aware, even now, even though I've made what I think is concerted effort to change my habits of mind, I still can feel the ways I feel nervous about talking about race, right? So thinking about like training folks for travel, right? And it took me too long to come to the understanding that understanding that the experience of a person of color traveling is different than mine, and that I should acknowledge that. And I thought that would be really hard to do. Who am I as a white person to tell a black person what it must feel like to travel, right? But then I realized I've done that for women. I've done that and said, no exterior hallways, be careful about going into your rental car. Like, I have no discomfort whatsoever telling a woman what to be careful about. So why would I not feel comfortable sharing what my concern for a person of color? It's just discomfort talking about race, right? I can't come up with any other explanation than that for it. And to me, it just sort of gets to other ways that we just don't see so clearly, the ways that the system is, Tamara's, just as always, you put everything so beautifully, the ways that, cultures can be standard and cultures can be sort of extracurricular, and just understanding the ways that we as white people are conditioned to not think about race, and what a barrier that is to good mentorship, to appropriate training, and it's your responsibility, and when you're in a leadership role, to get your whole office to be comfortable talking about race. That is really your responsibility when you're in a leadership role, and you have to model that yourself.
And I'll say, students are watching. The students are watching. And, in some cases, if you're uncomfortable with them, you don't have to say a thing sometimes. It's your body language. It's the look on your face that you're like, I'm afraid they're going to come and ask me something I'm not going to be able to answer. And sometimes we create non-welcoming personas without even being conscious of that if we don't feel comfortable. If you're think about the things that, think even about how you present. What are the things when you're presenting on that, you are in your groove, you are animated, you are feeling comfortable. And, there's something about connection, and there's something about delivering information. So, I think that, most of us can deliver information. You have to become really adept at making others comfortable in receiving that information. So I'm not saying that's the case. And some of the people were saying the students want to lean into a bi POC persona at a college fair but I think sometimes, and I've done this myself and looked at college fairs and walked through and see how people are presenting themselves. And And I think, sometimes it's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy that they're going to be looking for people who seem a little bit more invested in talking to them. And it could be that you still want to talk to them, but sometimes students are going to engage with you differently because they are uncomfortable. So they may come up and they may not know the right question to ask. And I think you have to be really, really flexible with that. But students will also see, like when they come to visit our office, they'll see how we're interacting with each other. They'll see how they see how our campus people are interacting with each other. So I think, if we're not creating harmony in our offices, when students come to some of those big scale programs, they can see like how people are interacting with each other. So I think, that's why you want to create spaces where everybody can work and be their best.
So I want to switch tracks. Another real moment. And this is about how bosses, managers, and mentors protect those who are under their wings. Because mentoring to me is about how you teach people to not be just like you, but to think better for themselves and be better. But it still is about protection. And I'm going to bring up the idea of compliment as insult. So if somebody from outside of your office says about one of your non-people of color, boy, that person could do their job a little better, well, you're going to take that as, I need to help that person, but it's not your job to tell me what I need to do with my employee. But if someone from the outside gives you the surprise, wow, that person of color is so articulate, as if that person is not supposed to be, will you, as a boss, as a mentor, as a leader, speak back to them, or will you just do a nervous laugh? Because guess what, folks? Again, you hired them. Expect them to be articulate. When someone says to me, Derek, or several other people, oh my gosh, you're so articulate, it is a blatant, racist insult. And something that we want from our superiors, no matter how high up the ladder we are, is for you to put a stop to that horrific, terrible insult that so many of us deal with all the time. You want to know what makes some people tired? That. And if you chime in and say, yes, that person really is articulate, what are you expecting as a boss? So part of your job as a mentor, boss, leader, especially in these days when you know people are tired from things that might be beyond the office, protect your employees, protect them psychologically, because the psychological becomes a physical manifestation. And you want to talk about turnover and how much money it costs to retrain someone after you've spent 2 or 3 years training them? That's money down the drain. So the reason why I took this total departure is this. I was reminded of a moment that had happened to me, and I was okay. It was not okay a time that it happened with a colleague at another institution whose boss didn't protect her at all, when parent after parent, faculty within the institution, deans within the institution at an open house kept saying, my, she's so articulate. But they said it with surprise. They said it with, didn't see that coming. They said it with, I didn't expect that person to be articulate at all when that person got on stage. I would love to say that that was just a thought, but it's something this young woman overheard. So, bosses, mentors, leaders, what are you going to do? Again, Jess mentioned this earlier, to be an active anti-racist rather than just someone who says, oh, I'm sorry, I know that person might have hurt your feelings. Well, have somebody's back. Have somebody's back. Be tough enough to step up and fight the racism you know is wrong, rather than the nervous laugh, the head turn, or the I'm so sorry.
Yeah, and I think that manifests itself in so many different ways, right? We see it obviously, Darryl, I think when it comes to race, all the time, right? And those that are my co-panelists know this, I get that a lot for my youth in comparison to my position in my title and how exhausting that is. It can happen to a woman, like it can happen to so many different people. I do think it hurts me probably more when it comes to the race situation, but you know, I've told Darryl and Tamara and you know our other folks that, like, you know, for me, it probably one of the hardest things for me has been the youth in comparison to my position and how I'm treated on campus by faculty, by staff, by administration, by parents, by students, because of being 34 years old and being relatively young as, you know, an AVP. And so, you know, these things can manifest itself, not just when it comes to race, though that's obviously very important, but they can manifest themselves in other ways too. And so thinking about ways that you are going to stick up for your staff as they're going through it.
Derek, it's the very same thing as those people who will call a young man with bold initiatives someone with bold initiatives. But if it's a woman, all kinds of negative, stereotypical, and we don't even have to mention thems come out. Like, what's the matter with her? Why is she so angry, etc. When all she's doing is the very same thing that you rewarded somebody else for. So again, that's a different webinar, but where's the support?
Yeah, I like the answer that Sarah put in the comments. What do you mean by that as a response to those kind of comments? Someone who's very articulate or who speaks good English. That's what happens in my experience. Wow, you speak English so well. Thank you.
I think Ralph may be frozen. Or is he changing? So I think we lost Ralph.
I think he is. He's frozen. That's it.
But I mean, I know we have so much more we can discuss. I do.
Uh-oh. Tamara, are you gone too?
I'm afraid to talk now.
I was going to say, who is still here? Oh, Ralph, you're back. At least you're moving.
I'm back. Sorry.
That's okay. We lost you, and then we lost Tamara too.
Oh man. Well, that's bad. One by one. Well, I just want to say, you know, how do we shift? How do we be that protector when we're working remotely in this time of online work? That makes it a lot harder, and I don't know what the answer is.
That does make it hard. Yeah, definitely much harder.
Well, Sarah asked a good question about how we can protect people in this remote environment. We've talked about the regular check-ins that you can have with the people you mentor, the people you supervise, the people you manage. You need to be vocal about how you are protecting and supporting and helping people. You also need to be someone whose actions to the outside world are visible. You know, it's one thing if you say to me, I'm so sorry you had to deal with that person. It's another thing if you say to that person in front of me who's making the transgression happen, you are being inappropriate. Because the apology to me after the fact quietly says that you don't have the spine to stand up to the person who's doing something wrong. So it's not that you have to be bold and brash like me, but you do have to have actions that say, I support you always, I have your back always, and I will stand up to injustice of whatever sort always. That's a great question, Sarah.
And just with the piece too about trying to do this in remote world, And I mean, we're feeling that as a staff at Haverford for sure. We just really miss each other, right? And it's so difficult because it's even, when we're meeting in person, we'll talk off, on the fly, just as people who get along with each other and like working with each other for the first 5 minutes of a meeting. Something about the Zoom meetings, you're just trying to get it done, right? And there's not that extra time necessarily always. So I've just had to remind, and the other thing about it is we don't have any time, right? Our time is all full, right? And the last thing we want to do is be on Zoom. So I've just tried to make it a priority to do individual meetings with staff, because as a supervisor, as someone who feels a sense of responsibility for the office, I have to prioritize that. What is more important in the work that I do than help managing us as a group, right? And all the other tasks I have, all the other responsibilities I have, all the other work I need to get done, none of it is actually more important than my role as a supervisor and a leader in the office. And for sure, if my staff is not, if I'm not concerned about their well-being, if they're not in the best position they can be to do their work and to do their work well, it doesn't matter how much work I'm getting done. I can't, it's not being done by me. It's being done by them. And so that's what I see as just my most important, as my top priority in my role in the office.
Tamara, we found you. You're back.
I did. I made it back. I made it back in time, at least to say goodnight.
Right.
pretty much, but we would have missed you. And I think it is time for us to say goodnight. I mean, again, we went around a little bit in some circles here, but you all have given us just as much to think about as we've given you with your comments and with your ideas and your approaches. So thank you all so much for taking part in this format. We thought it was very important for us to have a different kind of discussion tonight, and I'm really glad we did. So hopefully this gave you a lot to think about and a lot to process, and I know it did for me, and I know it did for my fellow panelists. So I will turn it over to them to say good night too.
Yeah,
yes,
go on, Tamara.
I was just going to say thank you so much. I mean, again, who knows? There may be a Dear White Bosses 3. Not probably in the next couple of months. but maybe we should do a check-in sometime, once the semester is drawing to a close, just to make sure that, just to see how things are going. And I'll drop my email into the chat in case anybody wants to follow up. But really, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, I concur. I just put my email in the chat as well. So if there are any questions, anything that folks need, I know there's been a couple of folks that have asked about our training plan that we have at Columbia. I'm more than happy to share some of that information with folks as well. And, for me, I think I really want folks to continue to do the good work, right? And continue to really expand your mind to what admissions can be and should be nowadays. I think we're just in a moment in this industry where there is a lot of reckoning, right? There's a lot of things that are going on and a lot of behavior that's no longer being tolerated by folks, particularly by folks of color. And I think it's a welcome change. I really do. And I, hope that you all will continue to be co-conspirators with us as we continue to push for the type of change that I think we all really want to see in this industry. So my thanks to you all for being with us this evening as well.
Yeah, I'm only going to repeat those words of thanks. And Sarah made a comment about feeling energized and not being a night person. I'm kind of in your boat, and I'm super energized right now. And I just got so much energy from all of you and your comments and participation, and to say nothing of the energy I got from the other panelists, and really just excited for this ongoing collaborative work with us all, and being inspired by your comments just now, Derek, too. Like everybody I know who's ever gotten into our business on either side of the desk, our motivations are typically really, really the same. So I hope we all feel excited about this. This is why we do this work. And it's hard, and it's harder than ever, perhaps, in terms of making the kind of change that we're better recognizing has to happen. and the kind of roles we have to take in our institutions in order to try to make change. But we should be excited about that, and we should be energized by that. And that's how I'm feeling and looking forward.
And I'll just say this. Part of the frustration of these sessions is we don't want to hand you the answers without you thinking. So this is to bring up topics, to have you think about them, and then do what fits your office culture, your training, your method of hiring. So what I'm hoping that we've done is give you some things to chew on so that you could move forward. I know to my co-panelists, every time they say something, I think of another way of approaching my work. So I want to thank you all and thank Marie and the Accept crew, but also to thank all of you for spending time with us this evening. We really appreciate all of you. You literally lit that chat on fire. So I can't wait to go back and look at the transcript of it because you all had some great stuff in there. So thank you all, and please be safe. Stay blessed.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.